They said he was wasting his time, a broken old man fixing a station no one cared about anymore. Every nail he drove, every board he patched, they laughed. But when the truth he uncovered came to light, that old waste of time turned into the story that saved an entire town. This is the story of Henry Cole, a quiet janitor who rebuilt more than a building. He rebuilt faith, justice, and the meaning of home. Before we begin, if you believe in stories about hope, redemption, and the power of ordinary people to change the world, subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. Every story we share travels farther when you help it along the tracks. Now, sit back, take a breath, and let's step into the quiet town of Maple Hollow, where one man's forgotten dream became the legacy that rebuilt yesterday.
Fog lay over Maple Hollow like an old wool blanket, heavy and frayed at the edges. Even the sunrise seemed reluctant to show itself, bleeding pale gold through the clouds as if embarrassed to look at the tired little town it was meant to warm. At the intersection of Main and Cedar, the stoplight blinked on a lazy loop from red to green, though no cars waited either way. A dog trotted across the street with yesterday's newspaper in its mouth. Somewhere, a porch radio crackled with the morning farm report, the same voice that had been delivering bad news for 20 years. This was Maple Hollow, once a bustling junction of grain routes and timber lines, now a place you drove through on your way to somewhere that still mattered. And every morning, just before the clock at City Hall struck 6, Henry Cole arrived in his dented blue pickup at the end of Birch Road, where the town's forgotten train station slouched against the horizon. The truck door creaked as he stepped out, thermos in one hand, lunch pail in the other. The air smelled of damp earth and rust, and Henry smiled in spite of himself. "Morning, Dad," he muttered, as if the mist could carry the words. "Let's get to it." The station looked worse in daylight. Paint peeled like old parchment, weeds splitting the platform boards, the roof sagging under the weight of years. A raccoon darted from the waiting room as Henry unlocked the side door. Inside, silence greeted him like an old friend. He set down his pail, unrolled a canvas of tools, and breathed the air thick with dust and cedar. He liked that smell. It reminded him of the summers he'd spent here as a boy, when his father wore the conductor's cap and the station hummed with laughter and steam. By 7 o'clock, Henry's rhythm was set: hammer, brush, sweep, repeat. He worked the way other people prayed, steadily, quietly, believing that each nail and plank was a step toward redemption. When the light through the broken windows turned from gray to honey, he wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at what he'd done. A single restored bench, polished and sturdy. One small victory against decay. He sat for a moment, listening. In the distance, the highway moaned like a restless ghost. Sometimes if he closed his eyes, he could almost hear a train again, the whistle, the clatter, the cheers of passengers. Almost. By 8 o'clock, he packed up, locked the gate, and drove back into town for his real job, at Maple Hollow Elementary. The janitor's entrance smelled of floor wax and crayons. Kids raced past him in squeaky shoes, their laughter echoing down the hall. "Morning, Mr. Cole." "Morning, Sam. Slow down before you break the sound barrier." He liked the school. The noise, the order, the feeling that his small efforts made a difference somewhere. He fixed lockers that wouldn't close, windows that wouldn't open, sinks that wouldn't stop. In every quiet repair there was purpose. At noon he ate his sandwich in the maintenance closet, sitting on an upturned bucket, radio tuned low. The announcer talked about declining property values, another store closing on Main Street. He switched it off. He preferred the sound of the boiler. It kept going, no matter what. After work, he stopped at Darlene's Diner, the only place still pretending optimism. A hand-painted sign read, "Fresh Pie Daily," though daily meant whenever Darlene felt like baking. She poured his usual black coffee before he sat. "Cold one today," she said. "Good weather for work," Henry replied. She leaned on the counter. "You and that station. You ever think about taking a vacation?" "Can't fix a roof from the beach." She smiled, the kind of smile that was half pity, half pride. "You're something else, Henry Cole. Most folks would have let that place fall." "Maybe that's the problem. Too many folks letting things fall." She refilled his cup. "Mayor Harkins was in here this morning. Said he's talking to a developer. Wants that land cleared before winter." Henry froze, cup halfway to his lips. "Cleared?" "That's what he said." He set the cup down carefully. "Well," he murmured, "then they'll have to clear me first." That evening he drove back to the station. Rain had started again, soft and steady, drumming on the truck's hood. Headlights swept across the platform, revealing the station's weary face, beautiful in its stubbornness. He got out, pulled his jacket tighter, and stood under the eaves. Lightning flashed, lighting the valley like day for an instant. For a heartbeat, he imagined his father standing beside him, pointing down the tracks as he used to. "Listen, Henry," the memory said. "The rails go two ways, forward and back. Which you choose decides the man you become." Henry whispered, "Forward, Dad. Always forward." He went inside and lit the lantern. Water dripped from the ceiling. Wind rattled loose panes. Still, the place felt alive again. He swept the floor, humming softly, letting the rhythm calm his thoughts. The next morning, the letter arrived. Plain envelope, town seal in red. Inside, a formal notice. Condemnation order. Structure deemed unsafe. Demolition scheduled pending approval. He read it 3 times. A lump formed in his throat, part anger, part helplessness. By noon, he was in City Hall, standing in front of Mayor Harkins' polished desk. "Don, you can't just tear it down." The mayor sighed. "Henry, look, it's dangerous. Liability this, insurance that. You understand. I understand you don't care what it means to this town. It means an eyesore. It means lawsuits. It means history," Henry snapped. "My father built half this place. He disappeared work in that line, and I'll be damned if his memory ends under a bulldozer." For a moment, the mayor's eyes softened, then hardened again. "You've got 60 days, Henry. After that, it's coming down." Henry nodded once, jaw tight. "Then I guess I've got 60 days to save it." Outside, the wind had picked up. He walked past the post office, the shuttered hardware store, the mural of Maple Hollow's founding, now chipped and fading. People looked away when he passed, some embarrassed, some afraid of catching whatever madness kept him fighting. He stopped at the bridge overlooking the creek. Below, water rushed brown and wild from last night's rain. He tossed a pebble in and watched it vanish. For the first time in years, he wondered if everyone else was right, if maybe he was wasting his time, chasing ghosts. Then a small voice behind him said, "Mr. Cole?" He turned. A young woman stood there, holding an umbrella against the wind. Dark hair, steady eyes, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Name's Lydia Finch," she said. "I've been looking for you." Henry blinked rain from his lashes. "That's so. Most people try to avoid me." "I'm not most people." She offered her hand. "I hear you're trying to save the old station. I'd like to help." He stared at her hand for a moment, then shook it. Her grip was firm, her smile genuine. "Help costs money," he said. "Not always," she replied. Sometimes it just takes the right story." He frowned. "And what's yours?" Lydia looked toward the distant silhouette of the station, rain blurring its outline. "My grandfather worked that line too. I think maybe we both lost something out there." For the first time in a long while, Henry felt a flicker of something he'd almost forgotten. Hope.
The next morning dawned clear for the first time in a week. Sunlight spilled across Maple Hollow, revealing puddles that shimmered like coins tossed into wishes no one believed in anymore. Henry parked his pickup by the station and stepped out, surprised to see another car already there, a small red hatchback, its trunk propped open. Lydia Finch knelt beside the bumper, lifting a stack of rolled blueprints. "Morning, Mr. Cole," she called, smiling through the hair that whipped across her face. He hadn't expected her to come back. "You're early," he said. "I figured you would be too." She handed him a cardboard tube. "Town Archives let me copy these. They're the original station plans, dated 1946. Henry unrolled one on the hood of his truck. The paper smelled of dust and old stories. "My dad would have been 15 when they drew these." "He's the reason I found them," Lydia said. "Your father signed the bottom corner as apprentice carpenter." Henry traced the faded signature with one finger. C. Cole. He hadn't seen those initials in years. The sight was enough to pull him backward. He was 10 again, sitting on the platform beside his father, legs swinging above the rails. The evening sun was orange as melted copper. His father's uniform smelled of oil and pine tar. "You listen to the world long enough, Henry," his father said, "and you can tell where the trains are headed by the sound of the tracks." He'd pressed his ear against the rail, heard the faint hum of something approaching, and laughed in wonder. The memory broke as a train whistle echoed far off down the valley, freight from another line, nothing that would ever stop here. Henry blinked and folded the blueprint carefully. "Thank you for finding these," he said. "You didn't have to go to that trouble." Lydia shrugged. "I like lost causes. They make better stories." For the next few days they worked side by side. Lydia brushed cobwebs from window frames while Henry repaired the ticket counter. She asked questions that kept him talking, about the old passengers, the war veterans who used to gather on the benches, the day his father vanished. It was September 3rd, 1983. Dad kissed Mom goodbye, said the line foreman called him in for a double shift. He never came home. They said he must have fallen into the river during a storm, but they never found him. "Did you believe that?" Lydia asked quietly. Henry shook his head. Not for a minute. He knew these tracks better than anyone. Something happened out there. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the creak of old timbers. Finally, Lydia said, "Maybe the station remembers more than people do. Buildings keep secrets." He smiled faintly. "Then let's see if it's willing to share." That weekend, the town held its fall market on Main Street. Henry went mostly to appease Darlene, who insisted he get some air. Maple Hollow looked almost lively for once. Children chasing balloons, farmers selling jars of honey, a band playing rusty brass songs from a flatbed truck. Henry bought a bag of kettle corn and stood near the courthouse. Across the square, Mayor Harkins was shaking hands with a developer in a tailored coat. They were pointing at a map, his map. The station lot was marked in red. Henry's stomach tightened. He started toward them, but a small voice stopped him. "Mr. Cole!" It was Emma Harkins, the mayor's 8-year-old granddaughter, one of the kids from school. She ran up clutching a flyer. "Dad says they're going to build a shopping center where the trains used to be. Is that true?" He knelt. "That's what they're saying." "Then where will the old trains go?" He smiled sadly. "Trains find new tracks, kiddo. It's the stations that get left behind." Her face fell. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed. "It's not." That night he couldn't sleep. He went back to the station, lantern in hand. The building glowed faintly in the dark, a ship adrift on a sea of grass. He walked the perimeter, running his fingers along the walls.
The boards under the west window sounded hollow. He pried one loose and found a small recess filled with old ticket stubs, a rusted watch, and a folded photograph. The picture showed his father standing beside another man in front of the same window. The stranger's face was blurred, but on the back, someone had written, "The agreement. Keep it safe." He turned the photograph over in the lantern light until the edges trembled. "What agreement?" he whispered. The only answer was the creak of wood and the sigh of wind through broken glass. He replaced the board carefully, heart beating faster than it had in years. For the first time, he felt that the station truly was speaking to him, and whatever it was saying, he needed to listen. Monday morning, Lydia arrived to find him already working. "Did you sleep here?" she asked. "Guess so," he said, setting his hammer down. "Found something last night. My dad left clues. There's more to this place than anybody knows." She studied the photograph. "Maybe your father was protecting something. Or hiding it," Henry murmured. "Either way, I'm going to find out." Lydia unfolded another sheet from the blueprints. "See these markings? There's a crawl space under the ticket room. If there's anything down there, that's where it will be." They pried up the boards carefully. Dust billowed, making them cough. Beneath the floor lay a narrow shaft lined with brick. A faint metallic glint caught the light. Henry reached down and pulled up a small brass key tied with a bit of rotted string. The tag attached read simply, "Locker 17." He stared at it, remembering that the station once had a line of storage lockers for travelers. All had been removed years ago, except one, the old freight locker in the maintenance bay. He looked at Lydia. "If this is what I think it is, we're about to open a piece of my father's life that's been locked for 40 years. They found the locker buried behind a pile of rusted tools and coils of wire. The lock was fused with age, but the key turned with a reluctant click. Inside lay a small metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Henry lifted it carefully onto the workbench and unwrapped it. A journal rested inside, its leather cover cracked but intact. On the first page, in his father's bold script, were the words, "For my son, when the world is ready to believe in the past again." Henry closed the book and pressed his palm against the cover, overcome by a tide of memories and questions. He felt Lydia's hand on his shoulder. "Henry, I think your 60 days just got a lot more interesting." He nodded. "And a lot shorter." Outside, the noon train on the distant line blew its whistle. The sound rolled across the valley like an echo from another time, as if the past itself was stirring awake.
Henry Cole had held many things in his life. Splintered boards, rusted nails, memories that never fit quite right. But never anything that trembled in his hands the way his father's journal did. He sat on the platform steps with the book resting on his knees, the afternoon sun casting lines of gold across its cracked leather cover. Lydia sat a few feet away, leaning against a post, sketching notes in her ever-present clipboard. "You ready?" she asked. Henry nodded and opened the first page. The scent of old paper rose up like the breath of another time. The handwriting was steady, deliberate. His father had never finished high school, but every letter marched across the page like a man certain of his purpose. May 12th, 1983. They're closing the line for good next month. The company says it's too expensive to keep the trains running through Maple Hollow. But I know better. It's not about cost. It's about what's underneath. The engineers found something in the tunnels near Ridge Bend. They told us to seal it off, say nothing. I've seen men quit the job after one look. I can't leave it alone. I have to protect it. Henry frowned. Tunnels? Lydia leaned closer. Does Maple Hollow even have tunnels? Not anymore, he said. They filled them in when they rerouted the highway. Ridge Bend's about 5 miles north. He turned the page. June 2, 1983.
If anything happens to me, the key goes to locker 17. Henry will know how to find it. He always listens when the tracks hum." Henry's throat tightened. He could see himself again as a boy, ear pressed to the rails, feeling the vibration of a coming train. Back then it had felt like magic, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. He looked up at Lydia. "He left me a trail 40 years ago, and I didn't even know it." She smiled softly. "Then we'd better follow it now." For the rest of the afternoon they combed the station for anything that matched the notes in the journal. Markings, old schematics, floor panels that didn't sound right when tapped. Henry's hands shook each time he found even a hint of his father's craftsmanship hidden in the woodwork. By sunset, they'd found another clue, an embossed plate behind the old telegraph desk that read, "Ridge Bend Supply Po, authorized personnel only." Lydia traced it with her fingertip. "This plate shouldn't even be here. It's from the mining company that owned the tunnels. Maybe your father worked for them." Henry shook his head slowly. "He was just a station conductor. But he did part-time carpentry jobs for whoever needed him. Maybe they asked him to repair something out there." He stared at the words, "Protect it," in the journal again. What was he protecting? And from who? The following morning, Henry brought the journal to the diner. Darlene refilled his cup and squinted at the faded writing. "That's your dad's, huh? Lord, I haven't seen that handwriting in decades. He used to order pie every Friday night. Cherry, extra whipped cream. Good man." Henry smiled faintly. He thought whipped cream could fix anything. Darlene pointed toward the mayor's office across the street. "You be careful with all this, Henry. Harkins is already telling folks the demolition's a done deal. The more you stir up, the more he'll push back." "I can handle Don Harkins. He's just loud, not dangerous." But as he left the diner, he noticed a town truck parked outside his station gate with a bright orange notice nailed to the fence. "Unsafe structure. Entry prohibited." He tore it down without thinking. The paper ripped clean in his fist. "Not yet. You're not taking this from me yet." That afternoon, Lydia found him hammering plywood across the open window where the notice had been posted. Sweat streaked down his face. "You look like a man about to fight a war." "Feels like one. Except I'm not sure what I'm fighting for anymore. My father's gone. The town doesn't care. Maybe Darlene's right. Maybe this place is just another ghost that doesn't know when to stop haunting me." Lydia set down her clipboard. "You're wrong, Henry. Look around. There's history in every board, in every nail you've driven back into place. You're not rebuilding a ghost. You're proving that the past still matters." He looked at her, studying the conviction in her eyes. "Why do you care so much?" "Because I grew up in a town that forgot what mattered. We let the old mill rot away. My dad worked there. When it went under, so did he. I promised myself, if I ever had the chance to save another piece of someone's history, I'd do it." Henry exhaled slowly. "Then I guess we're both fighting ghosts." They opened more pages of the journal together, spreading them on the old ticket counter under the lantern light. July 5, 1983. The mayor knows. They're planning to sell the station land to the mining company. They think no one will ask questions, but I've hidden what I've found. It's safe as long as the station stands. Lydia's pen hovered over the margin. He was writing about Harkins's father. Mayor Harkins's family has been in office since the 60s. "Figures," Henry muttered. "Guess corruption runs in the family." Another entry caught his eye. July 20, 1983. If anything reaches Henry, tell him not to be afraid of what's buried. Truth doesn't stay underground forever. Henry stared at the line until the letters blurred. He thought of his father leaving that last morning, lunch pail in hand, promising to be home by supper. He thought of his mother crying in the doorway when the train never came back. I used to dream he'd walk through that door again. Every time a car stopped out front, I'd think, maybe. He stopped himself. The rest didn't need saying. Lydia closed the journal gently. Then maybe this is him walking through that door now, in a different way. By week's end, word had spread about the old journal. Some folks called it nonsense. Others whispered that Henry had uncovered something dangerous. The town council scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss property safety concerns. Henry knew what that meant. On the morning of the meeting, he stood in the doorway of the station and looked out over the tracks stretching into the mist. He tucked the journal under his arm and said aloud, "All right, Dad. If they want to fight, they'll get one." At City Hall, the council chamber smelled of coffee and tension. Mayor Harkins sat at the center, papers stacked neatly in front of him. "Mr. Cole, we understand you've been trespassing on condemned property." "It's my father's station. It's city property now." Henry placed the journal on the table. "Then maybe the city should read its own history before it destroys it." The mayor's expression flickered as Henry opened to the page marked with his father's confession. The room grew quiet as the words echoed off the paneled walls. Entries about Ridgebend, about hidden tunnels, about a company that had bought silence with threats and money. When Henry finished reading, Harkins's jaw was tight. "Old stories," he said. "We're not rewriting policy over ghost tales." Henry closed the book. "Maybe you're afraid it's not a ghost story. Maybe it's a record." He left the journal on the table and walked out without waiting for a vote. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Lydia waited among them, worry written across her face. "Well?" she asked. They laughed, but I don't think they'll be laughing long. He looked back at the station, standing proud against the evening sky. His father's words echoed again in his mind. Truth doesn't stay underground forever. For the first time, Henry truly believed it.
The night after the council meeting, rain fell in thin silver lines across Maple Hollow. Henry didn't sleep. He sat at the small table in his kitchen, the single bulb above him humming faintly, the journal open beside a cup of cold coffee. Each page was a heartbeat from the past, every word a reminder that his father had known something he wasn't supposed to. He turned to the final entry, dated August 29, 1983, the week before the disappearance. "They'll be coming for the plan soon. I've hidden the rest where the line curves north, under the ridge itself. If Henry ever finds this, tell him the truth matters more than my name." He read it twice, then a third time, tracing the words with a trembling finger. He whispered into the quiet, "I'm listening, Dad." When dawn came, he packed a flashlight, rope, and a thermos of coffee, then drove toward Ridge Bend. Lydia met him on the edge of town, her car tires spitting gravel. She stepped out, hair pulled back, determination in her eyes. "I had a feeling you'd come here," she said. "I couldn't sit still," Henry replied. "You read the same line I did." They looked out at the landscape beyond the guardrail. Ridge Bend wasn't much, just a gentle rise of earth where the old tracks once curved toward the mountains. The rails had been torn up decades ago, leaving only impressions in the dirt, like faint scars. "I pulled some county maps," Lydia said,
handing him folded papers. "There used to be a maintenance tunnel about 50 yards under that slope. It was sealed off in the 80s after a flood." Henry squinted toward the ridge. "So we dig. Or find the old entrance, less backbreaking." They followed the railbed through knee-high weeds. Dragonflies darted through the humid air, the world heavy with the smell of mud and wildflowers. About halfway up the ridge, Henry spotted what looked like a collapsed timber frame buried under vines. He brushed the foliage aside and revealed a rusted metal door, half sunk into the earth. "Found it," he murmured. "Still locked." Lydia knelt beside him, running her fingers over the corroded handle. "Look at the stamp, Ridge Bend Supply Co., same as the plate in the station." Henry nodded. He definitely worked here. They pried at the door until the hinges shrieked in protest and finally gave way. A stale draft of cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of wet stone and something older, something forgotten. Lydia shivered. "That smell, like coal dust." "Probably the old supply tunnel," Henry said. "Stay behind me." The flashlight beam cut through the dark. Wooden supports lined the tunnel, many half-rotted. Water dripped steadily from cracks above, echoing like a ticking clock. They walked slowly, boots squelching in mud. About 50 feet, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. Henry's light swept across what remained of wooden crates stamped with shipping marks and a sign leaning against the wall, "Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only." Beneath it lay a half-buried metal box, about the size of a toolbox. Henry knelt and brushed away the dirt. His heart thudded in his ears. "Do you think—" Lydia began. He nodded. "It's his handwriting. Same paint he used at the station." He lifted the box. The hinges creaked, but held. Inside lay rolled documents wrapped in oilcloth, a brass pocket watch, and a faded photograph of 3 men standing beside mining equipment. One of them was his father. But what caught Henry's breath was the map folded underneath. He spread it on the ground and traced the lines under the flashlight glow. Tunnels, corridors, marked in red ink leading directly beneath Maple Hollow. Lydia leaned closer. "Your father found something down here the mining company didn't want anyone to know about." "Or something they couldn't control," Henry said. At the bottom of the map, scrawled hastily in pencil, were the words, "The station is the key. It seals the entrance." Lydia looked up, eyes wide. "That means whatever they found, it's under the town." Henry folded the map carefully. "And if Harkins tears down that station, he'll open it." Back in town, the day's gossip spread faster than the storm clouds. Someone had seen Henry's truck near Ridge Bend. By evening, Darlene's diner was buzzing. "He's lost it for sure," muttered one farmer. "Out digging in the mud like a gold prospector." Another shook his head. "They say he found something, though. Papers, old treasure maybe." Darlene set down her coffee pot. "If it's Henry Cole, it ain't treasure he's looking for. It's truth." Meanwhile, Henry and Lydia spread their findings across his kitchen table. The map, the watch, the photo. The map's annotations were so detailed that Lydia's historian side was alive with curiosity. These mines were abandoned after '54. There's no record of what they were extracting, just private minerals on the paperwork. Whatever it was buried deep enough to erase. Henry picked up the watch. The back was engraved, "Keep time for what matters." He closed his hand around it. He must have known what they were doing and refused to stay quiet. Lydia's voice dropped, and they made sure he never could. The realization hung in the air, sharp and heavy. For the first time, Henry understood what protecting it had truly meant. His father hadn't just been guarding secrets, he'd been guarding people. 2 days later, a notice arrived at Henry's house. Final warning, demolition to commence in 21 days. Henry stared at the paper for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Lydia. "We're out of time," he said. "If we're going to stop this, we need proof, something that connects the mayor's deal to those tunnels." "I might know where to find it," Lydia said. "The county clerk's office. There were land transfer records from that period. If we can link the mining company to the mayor's family, you'll have leverage." "Then we dig again," Henry said. "Not in the ground this time," Lydia replied. "In the archives." The next morning, they met at the courthouse basement, a dim room that smelled of paper and dust. Rows of metal drawers held decades of town records. Lydia worked methodically, flipping through property deeds, while Henry scanned old financial ledgers. After an hour, she froze. "Henry, look at this." The document she slid across the table bore the signature of Charles Harkins, the mayor's father, dated September 1st, 1983, transferring mineral rights under Ridge Bend to a private subsidiary of the mining company. The ink was barely faded. "He sold the land the week your father disappeared," Lydia whispered. Henry clenched his jaw. He covered his tracks, literally. They photocopied the record and walked out into the morning sun, both silent. The town stretched before them, quiet, unsuspecting. Beneath its streets, history slept uneasily. Henry looked toward the silhouette of the station at the edge of town. "That building is the only thing standing between them and whatever they buried down there." "And between your father and the truth," Lydia said. Henry nodded. "Then we're not letting it fall." That evening, he returned to the station alone. The setting sun painted the windows gold. He ran his hand along the wall his father once built, feeling every groove, every nailhead like a heartbeat. "I know now, Dad. You weren't crazy. You were brave." From the floorboards, the faint hum of a passing freight train echoed through the wood, as if the old rails themselves approved. He didn't know how, but he made a silent promise to save the station, to finish what his father started, and to bring the truth back into the light. And for the first time in years, Henry felt something stirring inside him he thought was gone forever.
3 days after Henry and Lydia unearthed the map and the land deed, the sky over Maple Hollow turned the color of tarnished copper. The weather forecast said the storm would miss them, but Henry had lived long enough to know better. Storms had a habit of finding him. By afternoon, gusts rattled the trees along Birch Road. The first thunder rolled through the valley like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. Henry stood at the platform of the old station, hammering the last board over a leaking window. Every strike echoed against the hollow walls, a defiant heartbeat. Lydia arrived breathless, clutching a folder under her jacket. "They know," she said before he could ask. "Someone at the courthouse told the mayor we were looking through records. He's furious." Henry didn't stop working. "Let him be. He's already planning to knock this place down." "This is more than that," Lydia insisted. "He called an emergency town vote for next week to approve the demolition early. He's fast-tracking the permits." Henry dropped the hammer and turned to her. "Next week?" 7 days, she said. "And if it passes, they'll bring the excavators by Monday morning." Thunder cracked above them. The wind pulled at the station's roof like a living thing. "Then we have 7 days to turn the whole town against him," Henry said quietly. Lydia shook her head. "He'll spin it. Say you're hoarding dangerous materials, trespassing, disrupting city business. You saw how people looked at you last time. They'll believe him before they believe us." Henry rubbed his jaw, staring out at the horizon where the storm clouds pressed closer. "Then we show them, not tell," Show. Show them what? The truth my father died to protect. That evening, the storm broke. Rain lashed the windows as Henry and Lydia sat inside the station, poring over the journal and the map again. Lightning illuminated the room in white flashes, and thunder rolled so hard it shook the floorboards. "The tunnels run under half the town," Lydia said, tracing the map. "But this part, look here, there's a section that loops right back beneath the station. Why would a mining company build a loop under a depot?" Henry studied it. Unless they weren't mining minerals. What then? He hesitated. What if they were moving something, using the station as cover? Lydia frowned. Moving what? Before Henry could answer, the lights from a vehicle swept across the platform. Headlights, 2, then 4. Engines idling outside. Voices. Henry blew out the lantern and peeked through a crack in the boards. 2 trucks sat by the fence, city vehicles. One of the men stepped out, raincoat flapping, flashlight in hand. Mayor Harkins. Henry's heart pounded. He's here. Lydia's eyes widened. He can't legally enter without a warrant. He doesn't need a warrant if he plans to inspect for safety, Henry said bitterly. They crouched near the back door as Harkins and a building inspector forced their way inside. Water dripped from their coats as they looked around with their flashlights. "Well," Harkins said, his voice carrying over the wind, "if it wasn't unsafe before, it sure is now." "Mayor," Henry said, stepping into the light, "you've got no right to be here." Harkins turned, feigning surprise. "Henry, I was worried about you. This place is about to collapse. I've been fixing it, not breaking it." "Fixing? You're a janitor with a hammer. You think patching up boards makes this worth saving?" Lydia stepped forward. "He's preserving history, Mayor, and we have proof the land deal your father signed was illegal." The inspector's flashlight trembled slightly. "Illegal?" Harkins shot him a glare. "Rumors, old paperwork, nothing more." Henry took a step closer. "We found the tunnels, Don. We know what's under this town." For a heartbeat, something flickered behind the mayor's eyes. Fear. Then he smiled coldly. "Then you better hope those tunnels stay buried. You start waving that around and you'll sink this whole town's reputation, yours included." Henry didn't back down. "You're bluffing." "Try me," Harkins said. 7 days, Henry, then this building and your little crusade are gone." He turned and walked out into the rain, leaving muddy footprints across the old wooden floor. Lydia exhaled shakily. "He's scared." Henry nodded. "Good. That means we're getting close." Over the next few days, the storm didn't let up, and neither did the pressure. Anonymous notes appeared under Henry's door. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." At work, the principal pulled him aside. "Henry, I got a call from City Hall. They said you've been neglecting your duties. Everything all right?" He forced a smile. "Everything's fine." But inside, he was breaking. Every day he worked double shifts at the school, then spent his nights at the station. He could feel the whole town watching him, waiting for him to fail. Lydia tried to keep him grounded. She brought sandwiches, coffee, and optimism, but even she could see the wear in his eyes. "You can't fight everyone," she said one night. "I don't need to, just the truth." On the 5th night, Henry dreamed of his father again. They were standing by the tracks in the pale light of dawn, the rails stretching endlessly ahead. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're close now, son. Don't stop." Henry woke to the sound of wind howling through the cracks. He rose, bleary-eyed, and went to relight the lantern, but the floorboard beneath his foot shifted with a dull creak. He crouched, running his fingers along the seam. The wood was loose. He pried it up and found a hollow space beneath, lined with metal. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age. His name written across the front, in his father's handwriting. He tore it open. "Henry, if you found this, then they've already tried to erase me. The thing they buried isn't gold or coal, it's memory. It's proof. The company used the mines to dump chemical waste. When I refused to sign the reports, they made sure I disappeared. Keep the station standing. It's the seal on the truth. Henry sat back, the words swimming before his eyes. He understood now. The tunnels weren't a secret treasure. They were a graveyard of poison. If the mayor's plan succeeded, the demolition would unearth it all and poison the very town his father had died trying to protect. He whispered into the dark, "You didn't fail, Dad. They did." Morning broke clear for the first time in a week. Henry stood outside the station, the letter clutched in his hand, sunlight glinting off the wet rails. Lydia joined him, her hair pulled back, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes. "You found something," she said. He handed her the letter. She read it, then looked up, stunned. This changes everything." "Not yet, until everyone sees it." She nodded slowly. "Then let's make them see."
The wind carried the scent of fresh rain and wildflowers, but beneath it lingered the faint odor of something sour and chemical rising from the ridge. The earth itself seemed restless. Henry looked toward town, his father's words echoing in his mind. "Keep the station standing. It's the seal on the truth." He squared his shoulders. "Then we fight," he said. Sunday morning came bright and deceptive. Blue sky, warm wind, and the kind of peace that fools you into thinking the storm has passed. But Henry Cole knew better. He could feel the unease humming in the air like a power line about to snap. The station stood silent behind him, freshly patched and gleaming faintly in the sunlight, a stubborn survivor in a town that had already given up. Lydia parked her car by the fence and stepped out holding a bundle of papers. "Printed everything we've got," she said. "Copies of the deed, the journal pages, his father's final letter." Henry nodded, slipping them into a folder. "Town hall opens at 10. "You sure you want to do this publicly?" He looked at the station, then back at her. "My dad died in silence. I won't." At 10 sharp, the church bell rang through Maple Hollow, calling people to the weekly service, but this time more folks walked towards City Hall instead. Word had spread like wildfire. Henry Cole, the quiet janitor, was going to confront the mayor. By the time Henry and Lydia arrived, the small auditorium was packed. Farmers still in work clothes, shop owners, mothers with strollers. The air buzzed with gossip and tension. Mayor Harkins sat at the front, his tie perfectly knotted, his smile tight. "Mr. Cole, you've been given 5 minutes." Henry nodded, opened the folder, and looked out over the crowd. "I was born 3 miles from here. My father, Charles Cole, worked this town's railway until the day he disappeared in 1983. I was 10 years old. They said it was an accident. It wasn't." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. Henry continued, voice steady. "I found his journal in the old station, the one you're about to tear down. It proves that the mining company your father sold land to was dumping chemicals in the Ridgebend tunnels. My father found out and tried to stop them." He held up the copy of the deed, the mayor's father's signature visible even from the back row. "Your family made money off that deal, Don, and when my father refused to lie, he disappeared." Gasps, whispers. Harkins stood, his smile now gone. "You're spreading conspiracy theories based on the scribblings of a man who's been dead 40 years. None of this has been verified." Henry met his gaze. "Then let's verify it. Test the ground at Ridgebend. Dig where they buried the truth." The mayor's face flushed red. "That's enough." But Henry didn't stop. "If you tear down that station, you'll release those same toxins into our groundwater. You'll poison this town. Again." The room erupted. Some people shouted in disbelief, others in anger.
Harkins slammed his gavel. "Meeting adjourned." Henry stood his ground. "You can adjourn this meeting, but you can't silence the truth." He turned to the crowd. "You deserve to know what's beneath your feet. My father gave his life to protect you from it. Don't let them erase him again." He walked out into the sunlight to the sound of murmurs following him, some doubtful, some moved. Lydia hurried after him, heart racing. "You did it," she said. "Not yet," Henry replied. "They'll fight harder now." That night, the backlash began. Social media pages filled with comments, half calling Henry a hero, half calling him a lunatic. Crazy old janitor chasing ghost stories. Always knew that station would make someone lose it. The next morning, someone spray-painted "liar" across the station's doors. Henry found it before dawn. He stood staring at the red letters bleeding down the wood, the smell of paint thick in the cold air. Lydia arrived moments later, her face falling when she saw it. He didn't speak, just grabbed a rag and started scrubbing. "Henry," she said softly, "you don't have to prove anything to them." "Yes, I do. I have to prove it to him." He meant his father. 2 days later, Darlene called. "You better come down to the diner. Some folks want to talk to you." When Henry walked in, the place went quiet. Then an older man stood from his booth, Mr. Adkins, who worked the rail yards back in the day. "Charles Cole was a good man, and he was scared that last week. I remember him telling me not to go near Ridge Bend after dark." "Did he ever say why?" Adkins hesitated. "Said the air smelled wrong. Said the company was burning waste down there." Next week, he was gone. Another voice chimed in. "My brother worked for that mining company. He got sick not long after they shut the tunnels. Cough that never went away." The diner filled with uneasy murmurs. Stories long buried were finding air again. Darlene set a hand on Henry's shoulder. "Told you, hon, people just needed reminding who your daddy really was." That evening, Lydia came by with more news. She said, "The local paper wants an interview. They're running a feature on you in the station." Henry laughed quietly. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I," she admitted. "But this might be the thing that turns it. Public pressure. If the paper runs it, the State Environmental Board might have to reopen the Ridge Bend case." Henry nodded, eyes distant. "Then we'll give them the story my father never got to tell." They met the reporter the next day, a young man named Connor Reeves who looked like he'd never seen dirt under his fingernails. He listened intently as Henry talked about his father, the station, and the letter. Lydia added context, explaining the documents and the potential environmental risk. When they finished, Connor closed his notebook slowly. "You realize if this is true, it's not just a town scandal, it's a state crime." Henry looked him in the eye. "Then print it." The article hit newsstands on Friday. "Local man claims town buried toxic secret under old railway." The headline was neutral, but the story wasn't. Connor had quoted Henry's words exactly. He'd included photos of the journal, the map, the letter, and the mayor's father's deed. By noon, reporters from neighboring counties were calling City Hall. TV vans rolled through Maple Hollow, cameras pointed at the crumbling station. Mayor Harkins tried to stay calm in front of the press, but his temper was cracking. He snapped, "This is all fabricated, a desperate man trying to make himself a martyr." But that night, when the first soil test results leaked online showing traces of banned chemicals in samples near Ridge Bend, everything changed. The town was no longer just whispering, it was waking up. Lydia found Henry sitting on the platform steps, watching the sun dip below the ridge. She held up her phone. "The results are spreading fast. You were right." He gave a tired smile.
I wish I wasn't. The evening light caught the old rails, glowing faintly like threads of memory stretching into forever. Henry looked toward the distant hills where his father had vanished. You kept your promise, Dad. You kept it safe until I could find it. Lydia sat beside him. What now? He looked out across the valley where the town's lights began to flicker on one by one. Now, he said, we make sure they can't bury it again.
The night after the news broke, Maple Hollow didn't sleep. Reporters prowled the streets like scavengers, headlights sweeping over old houses and shuttered shops. Camera crews clustered near the mayor's office, the cables snaking through puddles from an afternoon storm. For the first time in decades, Maple Hollow mattered to someone other than the people who lived there, and not for the reasons anyone wanted. At the edge of town, the old train station sat under the glow of temporary floodlights, cordoned off with yellow tape. Henry Cole stood just outside the line, his hands jammed in his jacket pockets. Lydia arrived beside him, breath visible in the cold. They've declared it a contamination site, she said. The state's sending inspectors tomorrow. Henry's gaze didn't leave the station. And Harkins? Trying to spin it. Says you tampered with the ground and caused a false reading. Henry let out a dry laugh. They'll blame anyone but themselves. He's scared, Lydia said quietly. Cornered animals always bite hardest. By morning, Maple Hollow looked like a crime scene. Government trucks rolled in, workers in hazmat suits combing the ridge with metal detectors and soil samplers. A helicopter circled overhead. The townspeople gathered along the road, whispering, watching. Henry stood among them, hat pulled low, Lydia beside him. A man in a white suit approached carrying a sealed container. He said to another inspector, "Preliminary tests confirm presence of chlorinated hydrocarbons, old industrial waste, deep deposits." The crowd erupted in confusion, some horrified, some disbelieving. "What does that mean?" someone shouted. "It means your groundwater's been poisoned for 40 years, Henry said. Cameras turned to him instantly. Flashbulbs popped. He didn't flinch. A reporter shoved a microphone toward his face. "Mr. Cole, how long have you known about this?" "Long enough to know my father died trying to stop it, and long enough to know people like Mayor Harkins made sure no one ever found out." Gasps, murmurs, the electric smell of scandal hanging thick in the air. Harkins himself pushed through the crowd, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the chill. "That's enough, Cole. You're trespassing on an active site." Henry turned to him, voice calm. "You can't bury it anymore, Don." The mayor's jaw twitched. "You have no proof tying me to any of this." "I've got your father's signature and your silence. That's proof enough." That evening, the inspector held a press conference. The microphone squealed, feedback cutting the tension for one sharp second before his steady voice began. "Our investigation confirms significant hazardous waste contamination beneath Ridge Bend. The pollutants likely date back to the early 1980s. Further excavation will be required to determine the full extent." Henry and Lydia listened from the back of the crowd. Around them, the townspeople murmured, realizing the truth was no longer deniable. Then came the second blow. Records show the property was transferred from a private company to the city of Maple Hollow in 1983. Suggesting municipal involvement in the concealment of these activities. Every head turned toward Mayor Harkins. He stood frozen, color draining from his face. The inspector closed his folder. "We will be conducting interviews with all surviving parties." Harkins left without a word. Henry watched him go, a strange emptiness stirring inside. He'd waited years for justice, and now that it was coming, It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like loss. Back at the station that night, Henry sat on the platform steps, staring into the darkness. The floodlights were gone now, the area fenced off with warning signs. Lydia sat beside him, silent. "They'll still tear it down anyway," Henry said after a while. "Not to hide the truth this time, but because it's contaminated." She looked at him. "Then we build something else." He smiled faintly. "You sound like my father. Maybe he's still talking through you." He was quiet for a long time. "When I started this, I just wanted to save his memory. I didn't expect to save a town." Lydia rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "Maybe it's the same thing." The next day, state officials began digging test wells. Trucks rumbled across the ridge, drilling deep into the earth. By afternoon, one of the machines hit something solid. Workers cleared away dirt until a rusted hatch emerged, the entrance to the sealed tunnel Henry and Lydia had found before. When they pried it open, a foul stench rolled out, acrid, chemical, wrong. A collective murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Inside, glimmering under the flashlight beams, were hundreds of metal drums stacked along the tunnel walls, each stamped with faded hazard symbols. The inspector looked grim. "This is it. This is what your father found." I swallowed hard. "He tried to stop them." The inspector nodded. "Looks like he succeeded just long enough for us to find it." That night, Henry received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, the voice on the other end was low, shaky. "Henry Cole? Who's asking?" "This is Tom Harkins." Henry froze. "The mayor." I need to talk. Not as mayor, as a man." Against his better judgment, Henry agreed to meet him at the diner after closing. When he arrived, the neon sign flickered above the rain-slicked parking lot. Inside, Harkins sat in a booth nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He looked smaller now, older, like a man who'd run out of lies. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Not until recently. My father made that deal before I was even in college. When I found out, I thought if I destroyed the station, it would stay buried. I didn't want this to destroy my family's name." Henry folded his arms. "Your family's name isn't the one buried under that ridge." He looked up, eyes rimmed red. "You think this makes me feel clean? I've been drinking poison water same as everyone else. My grandkids live here. I was trying to protect them." "By lying to them?" Harkins dropped his gaze. "Maybe I deserve whatever's coming, but the town doesn't. Help me fix this, Henry, please." Henry stared at him for a long moment. He'd spent decades dreaming of seeing the man who ruined his father brought low, and now here he was, broken, human, begging. Finally, Henry said, "You want to fix it? Then you stand in front of everyone tomorrow and tell them the truth, all of it." Harkins nodded, trembling. "I will." The next morning, the mayor did just that. He stood on the steps of City Hall, voice shaking as he confessed everything: his father's deal, the cover-up, his own cowardice. Reporters caught every word. Henry stood at the edge of the crowd beside Lydia, watching in silence. When Harkins finished, no one clapped, no one jeered. They just stood quietly, absorbing the weight of it all. Then, as if on cue, the church bell rang noon, clear, steady, forgiving. For the first time, Maple Hollow began to heal. That evening, Henry and Lydia returned to the station. The air smelled cleaner, fresher, as though the earth itself had exhausted after holding its breath for 40 years. Henry ran his hand over the doorframe.
They'll still tear it down anyway, Lydia said softly. I know, but maybe that's okay. He turned to her, eyes glinting in the fading light. Because what my father built wasn't just wood and nails, it was truth, and that'll stand longer than any building. She smiled. Then let's make sure they remember. They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, the same colors that once glowed in the smoke of a departing train. And somewhere in the whisper of the wind through the grass, Henry could almost hear his father's voice again. You did good, son. You kept it standing.
The morning the station came down, the town gathered in silence. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no speeches, just the sound of wind moving through spring leaves and the low rumble of machinery. Henry Cole stood near the fence line with Lydia beside him. The demolition crew waited for his signal. He had asked for one thing, that he be the one to decide when it happened. The old station stood proud even in its final hour. Sunlight gleamed off the patched windows, the fresh paint on the door, the new bench Henry had built with his own hands. It looked less like a ruin and more like a veteran waiting to rest. Lydia took his hand. You sure about this? He nodded. It's time. The crew chief raised a hand. Engines roared to life. Metal teeth bit into the walls that had once echoed with laughter, arrivals, and farewells. The sound wasn't a crash, it was a sigh. The roof folded inward, beams collapsing in a slow, graceful fall. Dust lifted into the morning light, glowing gold before drifting away. Henry didn't look away. He stood until the last plank settled, until the dust cleared and all that remained was a skeleton of stone and memory. It's gone, Lydia whispered. Henry shook his head gently. No, it's home now. The state declared the area an official cleanup site. Within weeks, crews sealed the tunnels and began removing the toxic waste drums. Maple Hollow made headlines again, this time for accountability and recovery. The mayor resigned, a special election was scheduled, and for the first time in 40 years, the town wasn't dying, it was rebuilding. Henry didn't want credit. When reporters asked for interviews, he simply said, I just listened to what my father started. But quietly, the town began to listen to him. Volunteers organized fundraisers. The school held an art contest called Rebuild Tomorrow, inspired by Henry's story. Kids painted pictures of trains, stars, and hands holding hammers. Lydia showed him the winning drawing one afternoon, a child's crayon version of the old station glowing like a lantern under the words, Truth doesn't rust. Henry smiled. Looks better than it ever did. One evening, months later, Henry walked the ridge alone. The cleanup crews were gone now, the grass growing back greener, the air free of that sour chemical tang. A small memorial stone stood where the station once stood. Its plaque read, In memory of Charles Cole, who stood when others looked away. The truth will always stand. Henry knelt, placing a single red carnation beside it. I did what you asked, Dad. I kept it standing. He closed his eyes, letting the breeze move through him. In the distance, the sound of a freight train echoed across the valley. A new line rerouted through clean earth, rebuilt track. The whistle rose clear and strong, and for a moment Henry could have sworn it was calling his name. Lydia found him there an hour later. I thought you might be here. He smiled, standing. Couldn't leave without saying goodbye. You know, they're naming the new community center after your father, the Charles Cole Station. Henry blinked. Community center? She nodded. They're rebuilding it where the diner used to be. Place for after-school programs, town meetings, a library annex. Mayor Harkin's replacement approved it yesterday. Henry laughed quietly. Guess some stations never stop serving people. Lydia tilted her head.
You ever think about working there? They're hiring a caretaker." He looked out toward the horizon, the setting sun turning everything gold. "I might just do that." That night, as he locked up his small house for the last time, he glanced once more at the photograph on the mantel, his father in uniform, hand resting proudly on a young Henry's shoulder. He touched the frame. "Thank you for the map," he whispered. The letter and the journal lay neatly in a box beside him. His father's handwriting would be preserved, proof that ordinary men could make extraordinary stands. Before turning out the light, Henry checked his watch, the old brass one from the tunnel. Still ticking, still keeping time for what mattered. The following morning, the sun rose over Maple Hollow like a second chance. Children walked to school laughing, their parents waving from porches that once stood empty. Workers patched roads that had been crumbling for decades. And in the town square, construction had already begun on the Charles Cole station. Henry and Lydia watched from across the street. The foundation was being poured, thick, clean, solid. You ever think maybe your dad knew it'd end this way? That one day you'd finish what he started? Henry thought about that for a long time. Maybe. Or maybe he just knew that building something honest always outlives the lies built around it. Lydia smiled. That sounds like something he'd say. Henry turned to her. No, that sounds like something we'd say. That evening, as the first concrete cured and the sky turned violet, Henry stood alone at the site. The wet cement gleamed faintly in the light of the lampposts. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his father's watch, and pressed it gently into the corner of the foundation. Half buried, hidden, but there. A piece of the past to guard the future. He wiped his hands, looked up at the stars breaking through the dusk, and felt peace. For the first time in his life, Henry Cole wasn't fighting to hold on to what was lost. He was building what came next.
A year later, Maple Hollow smelled of new paint and fresh-cut grass. Where the old diner once stood, the Charles Cole Station Community Center rose from the ground, brick, glass, and light. The town had built it together, plank by plank, hand by hand. It wasn't fancy, but it was alive. Children's laughter spilled from the open doors, the hum of conversation blending with music from a local band warming up for the dedication ceremony. Henry Cole stood near the back of the crowd, his work clothes cleaner but still simple, a volunteer badge clipped to his shirt. He hadn't wanted a speech or a plaque or attention, but today Lydia hadn't given him a choice. She stood at the podium in front of the building, hair tied back, the microphone trembling slightly in her hand. "Last year," she began, "this town discovered something buried, under the ground, under history, under fear. And because one man refused to stop digging, we uncovered not just truth, but purpose." She gestured toward Henry. "He'll hate me for saying this, but without Henry Cole, none of this would stand here today. So Henry, please." The crowd turned, clapping and calling his name. Henry hesitated, then walked slowly to the front. He cleared his throat, hands in his pockets, eyes down. "I'm no good at speeches, never have been, but I know about fixing things. Sometimes what's broken isn't wood or metal. It's people, it's places. It's the parts of us we stop believing can be mended." He looked around at the faces, neighbors, former skeptics, children who didn't even know what had almost been lost. "My father died trying to do the right thing when no one was watching. I just tried to finish what he started. And what I learned is this: sometimes saving something old isn't about holding on. It's about giving it the chance to become something new." The crowd fell silent, every word hanging heavy but hopeful. Henry smiled faintly. "So if you ever find yourself standing in front of something broken, an old building, an old dream, an old heart. Don't listen when people say it's not worth fixing. It always is. Applause rose, not loud, but deep, real, the kind that meant people understood. Henry stepped back as the mayor, new, young, and nervous, cut the ribbon. The door swung open, and the crowd poured inside. The interior smelled of varnish and possibility. A mural covered the main hall, painted by local students. It showed a train curving toward the horizon, a man standing beside it, hand raised in farewell. In the corner, written in careful block letters, were the words, "Truth doesn't rust." Henry stopped to look at it. Lydia joined him, a small smile on her lips. "They painted it from that photo of your dad," she said. Henry nodded slowly. He'd have liked that. She handed him a folded envelope. "This came in the mail this morning, from the Environmental Board." He opened it. Inside was an official letter naming him the Environmental Integrity Award for his courageous action in preserving public health and historical truth. He chuckled softly. "Guess that's a first for a janitor." Lydia grinned. "Not just a janitor, a builder." He slipped the letter into his jacket pocket. Titles never mattered to Dad, or to me. What matters is it's clean now. The town, the water, the air. Outside, the children began a time capsule ceremony, burying a small box beneath the flagpole. Henry knelt to help one boy close the lid. "What are you putting in there?" he asked. "A picture of the new station and a note for kids in the future." "What's it say?" "It says, 'Never throw away something just because it's old.'" "Good advice." He pressed his father's pocket watch into the boy's hands. "Add this, for luck." The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. Just promise me one thing. Keep time for what matters." The boy nodded solemnly. "I will." They sealed the capsule together, dirt falling soft and final. The sound reminded Henry of closure, but also of planting, like seeds. Later that evening, the celebration wound down. Lanterns hung from trees, their glow painting the streets gold. Henry and Lydia walked toward the bridge overlooking the creek, where everything had started. "You ever think about leaving?" Lydia asked. "Used to, not anymore. This town finally has a future. I want to see where it goes." She smiled. "Good, because they're hiring a full-time operations director for the center. I put your name in." He raised an eyebrow. "You what?" "Someone has to make sure the next generation doesn't forget what this place stands for." He laughed, shaking his head. "You don't give up easy, do you? Neither did your father." They stopped halfway across the bridge. The creek shimmered with the reflections of lanterns drifting downstream, tiny floating lights carrying wishes and memories. He watched them for a long time, the sound of the water blending with faint laughter from the square. "You know," he said softly, "for the longest time, I thought saving the station would bring him back." "And did it?" Lydia asked. He nodded, eyes glistening. "In every way that matters." She slipped her arm through his. Then he'd be proud. So would Maple Hollow. When they reached the far side of the bridge, a train whistle sounded in the distance. Henry looked up, smiling. The new line passed just beyond the ridge now, modern, gleaming, alive. As the train roared past, its light washed over them like dawn. Lydia looked at him. "Still think it's gone?" Henry shook his head. "No, it's just moving forward." They stood there until the sound faded, until the night settled again around them, calm and full of promise. Weeks later, Henry hung a small framed photograph in the lobby of the Charles Cole station. It showed his father on the old platform, uniform crisp, smile wide. Under it, a plaque read, "Charles Cole, 1935 to 1983. He believed the past could be saved. His son proved it." Henry stepped back, hands in his pockets, and let out a slow breath. Outside, spring wind carried the scent of rain and lilacs through the open doors.
Somewhere down the street, a child laughed, the kind of sound that belonged to a world made new again. Henry turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood for a moment under the evening sky. He whispered quietly, "We kept it standing, Dad." Then he smiled and walked home, a man no longer chasing ghosts, but carrying them forward with grace.